Well, hello everyone and welcome again to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation will be discussing men's health, living with pain and finding your joy. My guest today is Razzak Mirjan. Will be telling us about his own journey of living with the suicide pain from his brother. His brother sadly passed away from committing suicide. He was at the tender age of 18. Razzak is a top British lawyer. He is raising awareness through funds, through his charity, to make people aware of the pain he has been through, his family has been through from the suicide passing of his brother. He's doing some good work to raise this awareness through his celebrity cookbook, BEDER'S KITCHEN, from BEDER'S KITCHEN, and your new celebrity-filled cookbook. This is an amazing book that talks about different recipes from various sellers, from various celebrities. He'll be telling us his own journey and why he decided to use this initiative to raise awareness about the critical issues surrounding mental health pain. One thing that's truly fascinating about him is just not talking about his background in law, which is something we'll really focus on. We'll be talking to him about the impact of suicide on a family. What are the warning signs and how to prevent it? How can you help someone who might be going through that pain? He's founded a charity called BEDER, which takes a unique approach to raising awareness around mental health and suicide prevention in memory of his younger brother. We'll be talking about this very important issue, especially with everything going on in the world today, where so many people feel that they're at that end and there's no way to move forward. Meet my wonderful guest, Razzak, as we share his story. Well, hello everyone, welcome again to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation is one I really want you to tune in, sit down, listen to the whole conversation because we will get excited as we keep going through. But most importantly, I want you to understand this conversation is really detailed with everything going on in the world today. Suicide rate is on a high. Inflation, economy, instability, so much is going on. How can you tackle it to get more and more people living in life and finding their joy as well? My guest will be telling us his own journey, what he went through as his brother had something similar. I don't want to share that with you because I want him to tell you what led him on this path and what from his journey of his brother, he's made those changes. Razzak will be telling us his own story. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to our conversation. And yeah, really good.
I'm really delighted to have you here because, when we look at the world today, there's the war, there's a war. I don't even want to call countries. There's war going on around the world. Inflation is a big, massive problem. There's a pandemic, and there's that conversation. It might be coming back. A normal person reading all these things, some people read all these things on the news and feel, it's okay, we could get by this, it's not a big deal. But some other people might read this and think, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. What will tomorrow present itself? But you know what, we're going to talk about this later. I love you because you are a legal expert legal mind in the commercial contract space, which is something that very few people know about. And I'll be asking you to tell me your journey. You've also established a charity supporting mental health and suicide prevention. Before we get started, who are you?
So my name is Razzak Mirjan, and I guess I'm a 32-year-old living and working in London. As you mentioned, I'm a commercial intellectual property lawyer, doing a lot of work in the sports, wellness and lifestyle space. The founder of BEDER, and I guess in my simplest form, a husband to my wife Zaina, and most importantly, a father to my young daughter Leia.
Is that when you look at your childhood, because you're doing so much right now, you're the founder of a company, what led you on this path? What was your childhood like?
So I had a very fortunate childhood. I grew up in Windsor, and my parents did divorce when I was quite young, but was very fortunate to, whilst being divorced, have a very close relationship. So as I mentioned, lived in Windsor, grew up with my mum, saw my dad regularly, had a great childhood, very fortunate, a very good school, a good group of friends. So, I couldn't have wished for more.
So what led you in the path to become a lawyer? Because first I'm presuming you had to be a lawyer first before you went on to that specific focus area of the contract, the commercial contract and intellectual property law. What led you on that path? Was there someone in your family that was a lawyer, or did you just always thought to yourself, this is something I want to do? Can you just share with us why?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess the starting point is, I actually studied Arabic and Middle Eastern studies at university, as that was an area that I wanted to learn more about. My background is I'm Arabic and I wanted to learn the language. So I used university as a chance to do that, but I always had the idea of becoming a lawyer. And there's something called the graduate diploma in law, which is a conversion course in law that you can take after going to university that essentially gives you that degree in a year. So I did that, and it's always interesting when you're growing up to know what life as a lawyer or a banker or any profession looks like until you actually have practical experience and work experience. So basically, whilst I was doing my legal studies, I took on a number of internships, and one of them was at a boutique sports firm where they gave a week of work experience to someone every single week. And I applied and I got it, and I went in, and that was just my first real insight into sports law, and an area that I just found really interesting because, as I'm sure we'll touch on later, sports is an interest and a passion of mine, and I think finding out very early on that I could be a lawyer within the world of sport and other industries was really important. And then from there, basically, I refused to leave. And they weren't set up to take on, you need a training contract to become a lawyer after you've studied. And they weren't set up for that, but they wanted to. And due to the size of the firm, you have limited resources to start these processes. So I started the process myself. I filled in the forms, they paid the fee. And when they got authorized to become a training provider, they offered it to me, which was, very kind of them. And I guess it's a mixture of, hard work, great timing, a little bit of luck. And that's how I was really fortunate to start my career in the world of sport, but focusing, as you mentioned, on sort of commercial contracts, but also intellectual property.
And with sports, that's also quite interesting because, one thing I know about a lot of men, they love sports. So it's almost like bringing your baby to your world. So you're servicing people, but it's also servicing people you love. Tell me some of the joys and the benefits you've had from working in the sports world.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I always say that, you've got to do what you enjoy, and it's sometimes easier said than done, but I do try and live by it because obviously I enjoy law, but I love sport and I love the wellness industry and I love everything around those, but also other industries. But with those two as the example, if I can forge a career and bring in clients and add value to those industries, then I want to. And if that's through practicing law, then I'm able to combine it all together. So through that, I think, people get the best out of me and I get the best out of my day to day because, our day job takes up a minimum of 5 days, sometimes more. So if you don't enjoy it, and it is hard to understand what you enjoy, it does take time. It takes people 10, 20, 30 years in their career to understand what they like. And usually it comes through experience. But I think because I was fortunate to start from an early stage, it sort of set the tone and gave me that perspective. And from that, then, you get to do what you enjoy within a world that you're interested in. And then through that, the perks of the job, whether it's working with an exciting brand or an athlete or attending an event, it's all just things you enjoy. So it just is, a very fortunate position.
Razzak, that's very fortunate because I think that is one thing I think a lot of people struggle with is finding things that you're in this job, you're not enjoying it. So you're always asking yourself questions and you can never give it your all. And somehow you've managed to combine being a lawyer, you've moved on to this sports awareness, and you also do it in terms of contract. And I think that's something that I find quite unique about yourself, because you stand out in that way. And one of the things that you also spoke, you talk very active about, and you very focused in your work, is the way to protect yourself from being trolled because of the social media. So many people are, even in the sports world, even if you're an athlete, one of the things you find in that world is that you're constantly being trolled at. People are constantly saying negative stuff about you. In this day and age, is there a way that people could protect themselves from these digital sites where comments are being made, and how can that happen?
So social media has a lot of positives to it, through what we'll talk about in a bit. We try and use it as a force for good, but of course it has a lot of negativity to it, and it can cause a lot of harm. And of course, through trolling and people putting their negative comments across it is a prime example of that. I think, simple practical like steps and bits of advice are to, if you do experience that, is to use the reporting tools on there, report them to the relevant platforms, turn off your comments. It's a setting that you can do that can at least be a great starting point to stop people doing something like that. And also keep a record of it, and if it gets to the point that it is too much, or that it's upsetting people, then the police are there for it to be reported. They're practical sort of bits of advice. But I'd also just go back and when you're talking about what's in my career, I'm very fortunate to be where I am, but I guess that's only a small snapshot of it. And getting there has been really difficult. And I think the bit to add into it, to everything, is you can never forget where you came from. You can never forget how hard it was to get to where you are now. And one thing that stays with me throughout is that I'm always there to give advice to a law student, a paralegal, someone who needs that bit of advice, because that's what I had when I was going through the very early stages of my career. And it's really important, because it is daunting, and you're meant to have the answer from an early stage. And equally, when it goes back to doing what you enjoy, as I said, it doesn't happen at once. And an anecdote that I do have was that my wife, she's an interior designer, and she is excellent at what she does, but she came home one day and she's like, yeah, I'm going to quit my job. And I said, what? Why? She's like, well, because I listen to you and I look at you and you're loving what you do. I don't. And it was a good thing for her to realize that, because then she actually took an active step and made that change, which is a huge risk, but it's worth it if you're not happy. So they're just bits I wanted to add in, because life is great, and my career I'm very fortunate with, but it isn't always easy. And it's the people around you that can help, and having people there to give you that advice is essential. So I'm always here to help if anyone needs it.
Saying that, I'm just thinking about a young student now trying to, people graduating, we're going into the new year, September, and things will be happening. When you look at your life, when you were stepping in, because there's so much talk about diversity, there's talk about who are you, there's talks about your identity. People are so confused on how do they fit in a world that can make you more confused than ever. When you look at your career, how did you navigate all those difficulties and challenges that can be thrown at you from, it might be, you don't look a certain part and you have to want to be a lawyer. So a lot of people, because I know a lot of people want to be lawyers and they say, I don't think I'll fit in. I don't think the stereotype, I'm not that person. I might have the grade, but I don't think I will fit into the work ethic. So I don't think, what would you say to someone who might be going through that deep pain of struggles?
I'd say is persistence and believe in yourself, and do what feels right to you. The things that are most worthwhile are always the hardest to get. If everything came easily, then we'd never really achieve our full potential or really enjoy what we do. So there will be a lot of rejections, there will be a lot of no's, there will be a lot of pain sometimes, but it's always overcomable. And I'd say, I wasn't someone who had the grades. I wasn't as academically smart as others. So becoming a lawyer from a grade perspective wasn't as easy as it could have been if I had the grades. And it got to a stage where I remember, God, this was an awful part of my career, but I was, what was I? I was a paralegal, and which is just before you become a trainee lawyer. I was on a period of work experience. I was still doing my legal studies, and I was on the first day of work experience. It was up in Manchester, and I was getting my grades for some exams I'd taken. Bearing in mind, you've just got to keep passing to then, pass or get accommodation in the course. And I got the results through, and I somehow had failed a module, and I was distraught. Like, I just thought, I was struggling to become a lawyer at the start, and then this happens. I was like, well, it's over. But I'm destined never to become a lawyer. I had a complete, panic and meltdown. I must have been 20 or 21 maybe, and I basically then had to leave the period of work experience I was doing. I was in this hotel in Manchester on my own, walking back on the phone to probably my dad, just in tears, trying to like understand what had happened. Had a bit of a rush at thinking, well, if I can't be a lawyer, what can I do? But basically then let everything settle, realized that it isn't as bad as it seemed at the time. And even with all those experiences that have sort of shaped me and made me remember how difficult it was to get to where I was, it's still shown that it's possible. So those years between 18 to starting a job are incredibly difficult, because people expect you to have the answer, but you will never have the complete answer. But I'd just say be persistent in what you feel is the area that you want to be in. Reach out to people who are doing what you would like to do, to try and get to pick their brains, to try and get an understanding of what life is like, and give it your best shot. That's all you can do.
What from your work, one of the things I'm fascinated about is this bit where people, companies that tend to destroy their own brands, or they tend to destroy people's brands. So what are some of the actions that people tend to do this?
So from a contractual perspective, we do a lot of sponsorship deals or ambassador deals with influencers or athletes, and it's usual for there to be a non-disparagement clause, which is one that basically says that if the athlete does anything to disparage, as in talk badly about the brand, then there's a right to terminate. Equally, there are provisions that allow either the brand or the athlete, depending on what happens, the ability to terminate a contract if one of them is involved in bad press, if one of them is involved in a scandal, if one of them causes reputational damage. Because having those sorts of provisions within a contract is incredibly important, because obviously brands and athletes work incredibly hard to build up their brand, to shape the goodwill that's around it. So it's of paramount importance that you protect it, and you invest in a brand or you invest in an athlete because you see that long-term relationship growing the strength and value of your brand. But of course, nothing always goes to plan, and things happen. And if that does happen and it gives the opportunity for someone's brand to be damaged, then there's relatively simple contractual clauses that we always make sure is in there for the protection of the relevant party.
Because someone really stop it. I mean, because this is something that's caused a lot of influencers so much pain, because on their side, these are massive big brands, but they are just individuals who are seeing an opportunity and so excited by this opportunity, and most of them tend not to really read the fine lines, because the opportunity is so exciting, so great, almost too good to be true. And when they go into it, it's even more, the workload is even more than what was put out there. And there's intellectual property being stolen from a lot of people, because they haven't thought about that. Now they're actually a brand and they haven't protected the intellectual property. How can one prevent these pains from happening? Because this is a serious question, especially in the area of social media. And I'm sure a lot of people might be coming to you, asking you this particular question. How could people protect themselves from that kind of pain?
So I think the examples that you raised of, people either coming into fame, whether it's a social influencer or even an athlete, truly developing what they do and being met with a lot of opportunities that are sometimes on paper too good to be true, is the starting point is to try and be surrounded by a good team. It's easier said than done, but by having and it sometimes it does cost, to have, as my example, a lawyer there who can support you, to have an agent who really cares about you rather than just doing the deals, is a starting point, because the team around you that care for you and not just the percentage that comes from signing this or signing that is the starting point. And also being clear about where you see your brand or who you would like to be working with, because someone I used to work with, a law firm I was a part of, was Anthony Joshua, and he's a world famous boxer, but when he started as a client of ours, he was still growing in his career. But one thing I found really amazing when I was around that was that him and his team set out where he wants to be, the type of brands, whether it was a watch brand or a product brand that he wanted to be a part of, and stay true to it. Of course, nothing always goes to plan, but by having that long-term view and that roadmap, I think it's really important, because sometimes by signing a deal with a lower end, call it watch company, for X thousand, does put money through into the bank early, at an early stage, but then it can block a much more lucrative and more authentic deal coming through. So I think that's something to always bear in mind, because if you kind of cut off your nose to spite your face, in the long run, it only negatively impacts you. So that's sort of my view or advice around people who come to fame or exciting opportunities early, because it is daunting and it is a lot to consider. So I think having the team around is really important. But from an intellectual property perspective, it's something I touch on all the time, is how people can protect themselves and their brands. And when you know how to do it, it's really easy, and it's incredibly valuable to be able to do it. And that, in its simplest form, is to look to protect your intellectual property and your assets as registered trademarks, which is something that you can do on a country by country basis, obviously without getting into the technicalities of it. It gives you a registered right to use your brand name, your logo, your catchphrase, sometimes your own personal name, in relation to a whole range of goods or services that are then yours. So that's then an asset that you can license to brands if you're an individual, or that if you're a business, you can show to investors that you own. But it also can be a tool of security that can then be used to stop third parties from infringing your rights. So if you own a registered trademark for your brand and someone comes along to try and copy it or infringe it, then as you've taken those proactive steps, you can then close it down a lot quicker and a lot more cost effectively through a cease and desist letter, or issuing infringement proceedings. But like everything, prevention is always better than cure, and to be proactive and to invest earlier is so much more cost effective, and also just better for your peace of mind. And it's what we find all the time. But it's about getting that advice and having that conversation to understand what you have and where you want to go.
Oh wow, that is truly amazing, because I think in this world we live in today, this is something that's so important, and something we also tend to neglect, because we're not quite astute to know that this is something that needs to be done, until then we get burned. So a lot of people get burned, and all of a sudden they realize, oh my goodness, I haven't even thought about this, or I need to get out of this contract because this is not going the way I planned it to go. And they don't get someone else to review the document before they sign it. So I think someone like yourself talking open about this big issue in the area of social media is so helpful. And I really thank you for this. Now we go on to something that's so personal to my heart, because mental health is something that, if you have a chronic illness, it's something you know about, it's something you live with daily. But there's also a bigger issue with mental health when it affects people's life, where people tend to take their lives away. Can you just tell me something about your brother before we get started?
Sure. So I had a younger brother called Beder. He was, what was he? 8 years younger than me. And sadly, he took his own life at the age of 18 in April 2017, which was completely out of the blue, unexpected and obviously life-changing. But through that loss, you know, as a family, we founded a charity in his name, so it's called Better, but it's more than a family charity. It's really a platform, and it's certainly become a platform for us all to play our part in raising awareness. And at its core, or at its simplest form, we try and take a unique approach to raising awareness around these issues, and we look to bring people together who share similar interests through whether we arrange in-person events or we do other initiatives. And it doesn't matter if you've suffered with your mental health. It doesn't matter if you've experienced loss through suicide. You may not even consider these two topics of importance, but you'll become a part of what we're doing, whether you come to a concert that we've organised, or a sports event, or a yoga session. And then through getting involved in those events and initiatives, you're making time for self-care, and you're becoming part of our community and part of what we're trying to achieve in softly raising awareness. So I guess that's my brother, and now in theory my brother in a
nutshell. So when you think about it, because a lot of people listen to this and you said it was, he was absolutely fine, and I have a son who's 12 years old, and we always think, wow, how do we know they're fine? Were there any signs that you guys could look at and think, did he ever complain, oh my goodness, I'm not happy about this, or I'm not happy, or did he have an illness that was causing, did he have a breakup from a relationship? Because 18 is quite a young age for you to feel that disheartened about life. So where did that breakup come from?
It was a complete shock to me. I had absolutely no idea, and that's sometimes the hardest. Sometimes it's, I don't know, if people may find it easier if they had an idea or an inkling about it. But he was, an amazing individual. He was quiet. He was very clever. He had a group of friends. He was planning to go to university. He had his hobbies. He had his interests. He had a great family and support network and future ahead of him. But life got too much for him, and he took that decision, which you don't want anyone to take. And I think people always say that suicide, it's not inevitable, it is preventable, and I think that's 1,000,000% true for every instance. But with my brother, yeah, it was not what one we were expecting.
Your charity, which you guys, both your family and yourself, have founded for him in his honor, you guys take a very unique approach into raising awareness around mental health and suicide prevention. What are you doing differently? Because there's so many charities out there that would offer help, give advice, but I'm always keen to know what you're doing differently than what other people out there are doing.
Yeah, of course. So I guess the starting point was that when I was younger, I've always got involved in fundraising to raise money for causes close to my heart. And when we lost my brother, I ran the London Marathon, and I raised a lot of money for a mental health charity, but I never felt that I had done enough. So then the idea of founding Better as a charity came to mind. But one of the most important things to me was that I don't want us to recreate the wheel, and I don't want us to compete with the other charities that already exist, because what's the point when they're already doing an amazing job? So we actually have a mental health charity partner, which is Shout, where we look to further the work that they do and support them in any way we can. And we have a suicide prevention partner, which is Samaritans, which are, of course, an incredible charity in their own right and highly established, who have a text service that is available to anyone who needs it, and Samaritans have a 24/7 helpline that people can call. So we partner with those two charities. As I said, we don't want to compete with those that already exist. But when I thought, what can we do? This unique approach to softly raising awareness was what came to mind. And as I mentioned, we wanted, and we still do, to bring people together and then give people that chance to open up. We know that mental health is an issue. We know that suicide is high and another, of course, societal issue. But we don't touch on the statistics around it. It's heavy, it's uncomfortable. I don't think that adds too much value. given the fact that people already know enough about it. But I think we can raise awareness in different ways, and do it through, as I said, a concert. That you'll come to this concert, we'll bring 400 to 700 people into a room that enjoy this artist or the venue that we choose. We'll have an amazing time. We'll put time aside for that themselves to enjoy that, and then they'll be part of something bigger. They'll be doing good by buying a ticket, because that's what then, you know, adds a donation to the charity. And then conversations can come from that, because it goes to the point of, oh, I went to this really cool concert last night. Oh yeah, what was it? It was, oh, this artist. Oh, but it was a charity concert, and it was in support of this charity called BEDER. And you know, then it starts that conversation of them being able to talk about it, or potentially opening up that conversation to someone else. So we're doing a whole range of different things, but as I said, you know, we don't want to compete with the other charities, but also we want to remain personal, because BED has been set up for very personal reasons, as I mentioned. And I think that's also another really important factor that I experienced when fundraising and working with other charities, is that you don't know where your money goes. You don't know much about the charity, because it's so big, or you know, so busy that you can't, and you're just a little individual. But for a charity of our size, you know, a small donation of 50, £100 makes a huge difference. You put a few zeros on that and it makes an incredible difference. But we want people to you know, to be recognized for their support, and we want to grow reciprocally, because I think it's, of course, there's an expectation that people should support the charity, but equally we want to be able to give back, so that we grow together, and that personal relationship stays at the heart of what we do.
That's really good. I'm really glad you did, you know, you're doing that so in a very different way, rather than, because the market is already cluttered with so many people doing it. So it's always nice when people take a unique approach to solving a problem in a musical way, or whatever other ways you guys do it, which is so good. I have this question. This is something that's so close to me. The reason I ask this question is because I have a chronic illness myself, and with my chronic illness, when I was little, when I was always sick, and I never felt the other people's pain. I only felt my pain. And I remember my mom would be, when she knows I'm in hospital, she will always go sick, or she would find. And the person who was sick, will always feel very irritable, because it's all about me. And one of the things I find with people with this mental health who tend to commit suicide is that we forget that there's other people on the other side of the angle who will be highly impacted by this. It's just a reason I want you to answer this question, because in case someone else might be thinking about it, the reason they might be thinking about it is because they forget the other people love them. They forget that, yeah, they're in that pain, but sometimes, have you reached out to somebody? Have you talked to your family member? Have you done something? Don't be shy. Don't, like, when my chronic illness, I didn't want to talk to my family. But when I did open up to talk to my family, I found that it was much easier, and it made the healing process much easier. And I also made the suffering my mother was going through, my sisters, or whoever, my husband, whoever was looking after me, much easier. What are the impacts when someone who's going through mental pain? What are the impact on family members, the carers, on their lifestyle, on their livelihood? What tends to happen? So it's just in case someone is thinking about it, they just could now revisit and say, look, I better not do this, because this would have a big impact on my family, on my loved ones. Can you share with us those impacts?
Well, I think when someone's suffering, it is sometimes all consuming, and of course, objectively, it makes sense that you should consider other people's feelings, but I think it's a lot easier said than done. So when that person is suffering, it does, as you mentioned, have an effect on those around them. And if you've experienced loss through suicide, it has a life-changing effect, for the worse, of course. And you never want, that's why, you know, we're doing what we're doing. So hopefully that decreases, and less people are affected by suicide. But talking is what you mentioned is just the most powerful and important thing. It's sometimes scary and difficult to do, to tell people what's on your mind. You know, will they think, will they believe me? Will they react badly to it? What will they do? But rather than overthinking it, finding someone that you trust, whether it is a complete stranger and calling a helpline such as the Samaritans, or sitting down with a best friend, a sibling, a partner, a family member, and just telling them what's on your mind will lift that weight off your shoulders and will help them help you. Sometimes, I think the human nature is someone talks, someone responds, someone talks, someone responds. But sometimes it's really hard to know what to say, especially if you aren't the one suffering, because I've been fortunate to not suffer with my mental health, to the degree that a lot of people have. So when someone does open up about their mental health, and I haven't experienced that specific, experience, I don't know what to say. And that's uncomfortable not to know what to say, because you want to be able to help and look after that person. But accepting that and actually just listening is really important, because just giving that person the space to be able to talk or just mention it and say nothing more after that is invaluable, rather than jumping in with an answer that you think will help, or rather than trying to kind of swat it away and change the subject. I think it's just that understanding on both parts that these are incredibly, whilst they're increasingly common, but very individual cases that everyone can deal with and experience differently. But just being there for someone, just listening. And then when you do listen, and then when you do talk, realizing that so many others do experience very similar instances is incredibly helpful and incredibly powerful, but also that you're surrounded by so much love and so much support that just give that the first thing you do or you try, because everyone is there for you, and like that's a saying that I live by, and it's such a common one, but we're stronger together. It's as simple as that. So yeah, the more we talk, the more we open up.
That's so good.
The easier it is.
Do you think there are warning signs that your charity tends to focus on to make sure people are aware of when they think someone might be going on that path?
So for some people, there are warning signs, self-harm, talking about what's on their mind, being, slightly more reclusive, being more irritable. There are signs, but that doesn't always mean that they're likely to or may take their life. So I think the starting point is, regardless of if there are specific signs or not, if anyone has any degree of concern, then it's better to ask that question to that person of, are you okay? I'm worried about you. And ask it at least once, at least twice, because the first time people will just, yeah, I'm fine, like everyone says in life. But by continuing to ask it, we'll hopefully begin to break down that barrier. And also, don't be worried by asking that, because just by asking someone, are you feeling suicidal? That isn't going to make them take their own life. It's not going to lead to that. And it may upset them, it may offend them, but you're not asking to do that. As that as the outcome, you're asking because you care. And as long as you're coming from a place of care and love, then you're doing the right thing, in my opinion. And we do have really helpful resources on our social media pages, on our websites, that I think can help people with that conversation. Even other ways to ask how you are. It's as simple as that, but knowing different things to say to open up a conversation can be the starting point, because equally, we don't all have to be experts in mental health or suicide to try and make a difference. It's just taking that time, showing you care, listening, and being there for someone is all we need to do.
So does social media play a part in all of this?
It does. Yeah, as I mentioned, social media can be incredibly good, but incredibly bad and in a world where you can see other people's lives, or what seem like other people's lives, you can compare yourself to others. You can think, well, they're doing this, why am I not doing that? And it can lead to negativity. I experience it where I look at it and it takes me off my train of thought, and it takes you out of the present. And others can experience it in a whole whole range of different ways. So social media can play a damaging role to your mental health, and my thoughts around that are to only follow those accounts or those people that bring you up, or that are positive to your mental health. Now, and don't be afraid to unfollow, whether it's a friend, a family member, or anyone that does have a negative effect on you, because it doesn't matter if they get offended. It doesn't matter. It's all about you. You've got to do what's right for you. You've got to put yourself first. And also just switching off from it. I think, I think sometimes it comes with age, but also maybe profession, that you can spend so much time focusing on, oh, should I post this or should I post that? Life is too short, and the only person you're really posting it for, I guess, is yourself. And it's not necessary. Just enjoy it. Try and be as present as possible, and if anything, spend less time on social media if you can. This is what I try to live by.
Razzak, I love your lives. I mean, seriously, you have this charity you're running. You're a lawyer, and now you have a cookbook. Tell me, your first cookbook it's called From the BEDER'S Kitchen. So I didn't realize that. So the charity has a kitchen as well, and your new celebrity-filled cookbook. My goodness, cookbook. Before we even get into that, what's this with cooking? Where did you get that interest with cooking?
So well, I guess the charity has a number of areas of focus.
Okay.
The sort of three main areas that we focus on are hospitality, so cooking, cookbooks, food and beverage, stuff like that. The wellness, lifestyle, self-care side of things, and sport, whether that's mass participation events or running. And we've grown into these areas for different reasons. But when we began the charity, as I mentioned, we began the charity in November 2019, so a few months before the pandemic started, and we organised in-person events. When the pandemic started, obviously that stopped. So we thought of ways that we could still bring people together, and cooking classes was one of them. So I started to reach out to a whole range of different personalities and foodies to see if they'd be open to hosting a cooking class in support of Better, that again would give people that chance to come together, okay, on Zoom, but do something fun, be creative, and fill the time of being in lockdown effectively. And it proved really popular. I enjoy cooking. I find it really enjoyable. And as it became more popular, but lockdown was ending, I had the idea of not wanting to lose that momentum, and the idea of a cookbook came to mind. It was a great idea, unbelievable. I didn't know what I'd really signed myself up for, because it is a lot of work. But we published our first cookbook, which is called From BEDER'S Kitchen. And it's basically a collection of recipes from famous chefs, well-known restaurants, and leading social foodies. So we've got people involved like Gordon Ramsay, Yotam Ottolenghi. We've got restaurants such as Hawksmoor and Dishoom. We've got bloggers such as Michael Z and Romy Gill and others, where they donated a recipe, but they also provided a reflection about how they look after their mental health, what advice they'd give to their younger self, which then hopefully made this a unique cookbook, because of course there were 90 amazing recipes for all types of diets and different tastes, but also at the bottom there are reflections, which I think are just as interesting, if not more interesting and powerful. And it gave us a chance to do something different, as I mentioned, because in-person events are amazing, but they can only impact those within the vicinity of the event. And if you miss the concert or the football match or the yoga class, then that ship sailed. And obviously mental health is much more than a London-centric issue. So by being able to produce a cookbook, we now have this beautiful physical product that has been fortunate to be sold worldwide. It's in places like Waterstones and Harrods and Whole Foods. So it's done very well, which we're very lucky with.
Oh, congratulations. So anyone who wants to get it, you just said from BEDER'S Kitchen could go out and buy this definitely from Harris, Amazon, I presume. And
The website, but most importantly, I guess to add in there is we found that obviously a really popular vehicle to raise awareness, and it's actually led us to create our second charity cookbook, which is called Eat with Better, and it follows a very similar format, but it has recipes that have been made bespokely for well-known personalities and inspirational individuals. So again, we've been really lucky with the support that we've secured, but people like Stephen Bartlett, Joanna Lumley, Dame Kelly Holmes, Ella Mills of Deliciously Ella, Caroline Rush, Giovanna Fletcher, a whole range of amazing personalities are now behind this as a project. And I'm really excited for that to come out. We're publishing that on the 10th of October, which is World Mental Health Day. And I'm hopeful that that's going to be even bigger and better than the first. And that will be coming out soon. But then I'm not sure we'll do any more after that.
oh my goodness, but I think it's from BEDER'S Kitchen is really something exciting. I think people should definitely get that. When I look at you, you seem you have it together. You have a beautiful daughter, you have your wife, you have your job. How do you pull it together with everything that's happened with your brother? But you just seem so composed and ready to help others and learn from this, so that no one else goes through that pain, that mental health pain of suicide like you have been through. How are you dealing with your own mental health?
It's a very good question, and one I have to stay on top of, because you've got to practice what you preach. Of course, I have good days and bad days. I'm fortunate at the moment to be having a lot more good days than bad. But I guess the starting point is I have a very supportive family around me that, of course, is paramount. I've got a very supportive boss, which is equally important, to be able to allow me to do my day job as a lawyer, but also he's very supportive of the work that we do with the charity, which is very, very important. But also making time to switch off and to do the things I enjoy, whether that's playing sport, whether that's traveling, whether it's a newfound love of yoga. It's really important. And I think, of course, from the outside looking in, life looks very good, and life is very good, and the charity is certainly moving in the right direction, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm of the personality and mindset where almost there's forever an opportunity to go after. But I realized recently that it's okay, and it's important, it's of paramount importance to take a step back and sometimes just do nothing, because the deadlines that you set or the expectations you set are only personal. If I say I'm going to do this by this date, or I'm going to send this person an email by tonight, they're the deadlines I set on myself. So it's perfectly fine for this to wait a little bit longer, or that to be done at a different point of time. And for example, I went on holiday recently and completely switched off, and it was so important. And did I miss opportunities? Potentially, but that's okay, because more will come, and you need to be obviously at your strongest or at your most stable. And by doing that, I think it's really important to make time for self-care and beyond. And the final bit is just to be unapologetic about it, because you've got to put yourself first. And of course, there are expectations and family pressures and social pressures that, oh, I should go to this, or oh, I should go to my friend's party, or yeah, we should do this. But if it's not for you, or you aren't feeling up to it, or you don't want to do it, whilst it's maybe difficult to say no, or they may not like the sound of that, it's really important, because the only person at the end of the day who suffers is you. And that's obviously what we need to avoid, and be aware of sort of where we are. So I'm good. I'm in a very fortunate and a good place at the moment, but that's just because I try to keep a balance of sorts, but it is busy.
That's really good. The final question before we let you go is that, human tragedy is really something that's painful to deal with. The fact that you will not get to see that person again. If there's anyone going through that pain right now, what kind of tips would you give them to help them overcome that challenge and pain of suffering of that loss?
That's a difficult question. You know, it's obviously, yeah, it's an emotional one. I think the starting point is, don't be afraid, again, to talk about what's in your mind. Don't be afraid to talk about the person, if we're talking about suicide, as the person that you've lost, because I found it from the early stages where we were having a family dinner with aunts and uncles, and I mentioned BEDER'S name, and someone turned to me and said, "Oh my God, I'm so happy you mentioned his name. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could bring it up. I didn't want to upset you." And I completely understand that position, because it is a difficult, emotive subject that has a stigma attached to it. But by talking about whatever's on your mind, the person that you've lost, the good times, the bad times, the anecdotes, that's what helps slowly come to terms with it. Someone told me recently an interesting saying, that people die twice. And when they said that, I thought, what do you mean? But obviously someone dies when they pass away, but also the second time is when people stop talking about them. And that actually rang true to me, that it's really important that you do continue to talk about people and that you do keep them with you. Of course, it's not the same, but for me, I found that really important and useful. The other is what I found helpful, and it's all personal because everyone finds their own roots in different ways. It's again connected to talking, but it's therapy and seeing a professional. And it sometimes takes time and it's sometimes difficult to access therapy. But when you find a therapist, that neutral point, who can give you that space, can help you come to terms with where you're at, I found really useful. The first therapist I found listened to what I said and then said, "Oh, your brother must have been like this, your brother must have been like that." And I just thought, no, let me tell you about him. I'll happily tell you all about him, and then you'll understand who he is. But don't try and build that picture. And then equally, it has to be at a time when you're ready, because I didn't start therapy for a year and a half, maybe, after my brother passed away, but I did so when I felt ready to do so, and I found it really useful. So they're the two sort of nuggets of advice I'd give, because what I've found is, sadly, when you do connect with someone who has suffered a similar loss, that understanding is automatic, and you can actually build a stronger connection with someone in 5 minutes through someone who sadly lost someone through suicide than you can with friends you've known for 10 or 20 years.
That's so true. I really appreciate this. This is a marvelous thing you're doing, and I'm so glad that you are shining a light on something so important, especially in times like this, where a lot of people are so confused with what's going on with the world. Everything seems so difficult. Every time they think things are getting better, something else comes along. And, then there's the social media pain as well. There's just so much pain everywhere you turn. And there you are doing something, really shining the light and telling people that you can still find your joy, no matter what you're going through, no matter how painful things are right now. There's always light at the end of the tunnel, because it's always going to be painful for people who are at the end. So try and do what you can. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to really talk about this really important issue. Thank you. Any final words before we let you go?
I equally thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting, and I think when I read a bit about your book and that it was that pain is an inevitable part of daily life, that's obviously what it's become when you experience something through this. But if we can use what we're trying to do as a family and better as a charity to show that positives can come, then that's certainly what we can do and we want to do, and just to try and inspire those around us, as we can all play our part, and that by doing stuff together, the more we can do. So no, I just want to say a huge thank you for reaching out and for giving your time up to have that conversation, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Really, thank you.